Record numbers of immigrants arrive in Britain, according to the latest figures. 650,000 people came to the UK in the space of a year, including record numbers from the EU, most of them for work. We'll be asking how concerned the government will be about these latest figures, also this lunchtime. The football abuse scandal, almost 900 calls in just a week to a special helpline as another Newcastle player speaks out.
I literally just froze. Could not speak, with fear, with shock, with disbelief.
New footage emerges from the plane that crashed carrying a Brazilian football team as investigators try to establish why it ran out of fuel. The UN criticises Russia for not allowing aid into areas of Aleppo as nearly 500,000 people flee the fighting. Lower speed limits, clean air zones and redesigned speed bumps. How stricter traffic controls could cut deaths from pollution.
In the south, highly controversial plans to change health services in Dorset go out for public consultation. And a 7-vehicle pile-up in Oxfordshire leaves 3 badly hurt and 1 man arrested.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The number of people who've moved to the UK in a year has hit an all-time high. Between June 2015 and June 2016, 650,000 migrants arrived here. That's the equivalent of a city around the size of Glasgow. The Office for National Statistics said most came here to work, and while 1 in 4 were EU citizens, the majority were not. For the first time, the country which tops the list of migrants is Romania, followed by China and Poland. However, net migration, the difference between immigration and emigration, was 335,000, which was similar to the year before. Sarah Campbell reports.
Much as the government may wish to stem the tide, people keep coming. Britain's status as a place hundreds of thousands want to move to remains unchanged. In the year to June 2016, 650,000 people migrated here. That's the highest number on record. They are leaving too. The net migration figure, which takes into account the number who emigrate, is almost unchanged from last year at 335,000. But that's more than 3 times the government's aspirational target of less than 100,000 migrants per year.
Brexit gives us the opportunity to control numbers coming in from the rest of Europe in the same way that we can control numbers coming in from outside Europe. So I think there's an opportunity during the negotiations to ensure we can deliver on that, which I think was central to the referendum campaign and a clear message from the British people.
There were a record number of immigrants, 284,000 from the European Union. Today's figures also reveal that for the first time, Romania tops the table in terms of country of origin, with 54,000 immigrants, followed by 44,000 Chinese and 38,000 Polish.
Very disappointing, and underline why we have to take a very tough position in the Brexit negotiations, frankly. I think that migration at the present levels is simply unsustainable. We've thought that for some time.
Labour today accused the Prime Minister of failing to provide EU nationals with certainty about their future here. Most of the data released today predates the Brexit vote. However, there are signs it may be having an impact. In the year to September, there were over 37,000 grants of permanent residency to Europeans. That's double the number the year before.
Those don't include the applications that are still being processed by the Home Office, and there's evidence of quite a big increase in the high tens of thousands of applications that are still waiting to be decided, and there's some indication that that is going to go up a lot more in the quarters to come.
The immigration debate continues to dominate headlines, and these latest figures will do little to quell the concerns of those who are worried that too many people see Britain as their destination of choice. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
With me now is our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw. How worried is the government going to be about these latest figures, record numbers?
If it's worried, it's certainly not saying that it's worried. It's obviously not happy that the figures are not going down and they're at historically high levels. But what they say is that they have an opportunity when Britain leaves the EU to get some kind of negotiation or some settlement which enables them to control the number of people coming in from the European Union. Now, How that's done, well, that will be subject to the negotiations because clearly there's freedom of movement question. I think what's very interesting about the figures is the number of people who are coming to Britain who haven't secured a job but are looking for work. Those numbers have gone up to 130,000 from 107,000 the same period last year. Now, is that the key to it? Can the government try and get some kind of deal so that only EU citizens who've secured employment are able to come here rather than those who are just looking for work? Perhaps that's where the answer to this lies, but clearly it's all about those negotiations with the EU and the terms of Brexit. That's the only way, realistically, they can get migration down to the levels that they want it to be in the tens of thousands.
Danny Shaw, thank you. Our political correspondent Carol Walker is at Westminster. And Carol, leaked documents have revealed these controversial plans from Theresa May when she was Home Secretary to deal with the children of illegal immigrants.
That's right. What these leaked letters suggest is that Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary back in the summer of last year, when the government then, as now, was under pressure to control immigration, came up with a plan which would essentially deprioritise the children of illegal immigrants. They would be at the back of the queue when it came to school places. The idea ran into a lot of opposition from ministers, amongst them Nicky Morgan, who was then Education Secretary, who felt that this could lead to the segregation of these children. It could mean that some of them might even fall out of education altogether, and that it would put unfair pressure on schools who'd have to do things like carry out checks on passports. Now, some might applaud Theresa May for being prepared to take such a tough line to try to control immigration, but there was so much opposition that the plan was dropped. And the Immigration Minister told me this morning that it is not government policy and the government has no plans to introduce any sort of scheme like this, despite all the pressure over those immigration statistics.
And talking of government plans, there's some detail emerging from David Davis about what Britain could look like outside the EU.
That's right. Remember back to the referendum campaign, those who wanted to leave, talking about the hundreds of millions of pounds that we contribute to the EU, that we could have back to spend on Britain's own priorities. Well, today, David Davis, the minister in charge of the Brexit process, said Britain could continue to contribute to the EU even after we leave. Now, that might disappoint some people, but so far, many of those leading Brexit campaigners have been pretty relaxed about it. They're saying that it's right for the government to keep all its options open, particularly when there's so much uncertainty about exactly what sort of deal the government can get when it does leave the European Union.
Carol Walker in Westminster, thank you. Another former Newcastle United footballer has come forward to say he was abused while playing for the club. David Etox says he was groomed by the coach, George Ormond, and that when he left the club, he was a shell of his former self. The NSPCC charity said its hotline, set up to offer support to victims, has received at least 860 calls in its first week alone. Our sports correspondent Richard Conway reports.
For years, football's victims believed they were alone in their suffering. The shocking truth is that they weren't. The NSPCC's dedicated helpline has confirmed it received over 860 calls in its first week, with more than 60 people referred to the police or child services.
We're frankly staggered at the number of calls that have been made to this dedicated NSPCC helpline since it was set up a week ago. Over 860 now, and it is unprecedented in our experience of setting up a helpline like this to get so many calls in such a short period of time.
The Football Association has launched an internal inquiry into who knew what and when. Today, the newly appointed England manager encouraged other survivors of abuse to come forward.
I played with one of the players who's recently come forward, and the reality of that, as they have said, is that they haven't felt able to speak about that until this moment. I think the world was very different 20 years ago. I think it is important we acknowledge that and learn from it. And I repeat, I think a lot of those lessons have already been learned, because that's why the situation we have now in terms of child protection was completely different.
It's alleged the Premier League side Chelsea made a payment to a former player who claims he was abused by the club's former chief scout in the 1970s. According to the Daily Telegraph, the money was paid within the past 3 years. The club have launched their own inquiry amidst reports other big clubs may have made similar payments. The chief executive of the FA was clear when asked today about the potential consequences of clubs engaging in any cover-up.
We have clear laws and rules in the game that need to be followed, and if there's been any evidence of a breach of those, so hushing up would be one, subject to due process, i.e. the police need to be the right place in this. When it's our turn to apply the rules, we absolutely will, from top to bottom, regardless of size of club.
Meanwhile, a former Newcastle United footballer, David Ituk, is the latest player to say he was abused by coach George Ormond. Mr. Ituk was not part of a 2002 case in which Ormond was jailed for 6 years for indecent assault, but has now filed a complaint to the police. He says Ormond preyed on him because he was vulnerable, as his father was seriously ill with bowel cancer at the time.
How do you make a statement that you went out with somebody, they came back to your room, they masturbated in front of you? How do you tell that story without feeling like you're to blame?
As more players come forward and authorities continue to investigate, British football is waking up to the fact there will be no quick fix to this crisis. Richard Conway, BBC News.
Health experts are urging councils in England to consider new speed limits for road traffic to improve air quality in urban areas. The health advisory body NICE says pollution, largely from traffic, contributes to 25,000 deaths in England each year. Our health correspondent Robert Piggott reports.
The smoky veil masking the dawn over London contains the pollution that in 1 year alone killed nearly 10,000 of its people. Across the country, pollution from road traffic, nitrogen dioxide and tiny particles from vehicle exhaust, brake linings and tyres are causing cancer and respiratory and heart disease. Coping with the impact on health costs the UK up to £18 billion a year. NICE says a change in traffic flow could make the air significantly cleaner.
We're really encouraging local authorities to reduce the environment to encourage more smoother driving, less speeding, less acceleration and deceleration, which is what causes the emission of these harmful products.
Road traffic has increased to record levels. Estimates for the 12 months ending in September 2016 suggest there were 320 billion vehicle miles travelled on British roads, almost 1.5% higher than the previous 12 months. NICE says smoother driving would come with more variable speed limits on motorways and 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in congested streets. Another suggestion is for speed humps to be redesigned to reduce acceleration between them, although safety groups argue that they also reduce accidents. Cheaper housing is often near the busiest roads, so pollution disproportionately affects poorer people. NICE wants councils to distance new houses from traffic and to site the most heavily used rooms in them away from the road.
Almost everything that's in the guidelines requires more money. It can be revenue funding, day-to-day expenditure, or it can be capital funding for new assets. So if we want to see the sort of action that NICE are proposing, the government really is going to have to step in and address some of those funding issues.
The guidelines aren't mandatory, but they may increase pressure on councils to act and give them moral support for potentially unpopular measures. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
New images have emerged from on board the plane that crashed, killing most of a Brazilian football team. Investigators are trying to establish why the plane ran out of fuel as it came into land. There was also a catastrophic electrical failure. Only 6 of the 77 people on board survived. Our correspondent Richard Lister reports.
The last images of the passengers and crew on Lamia Flight 2933. Everything is normal. The pilot is clearly thrilled to have the Chapecoense team on board. They're going with a lot of hope and a lot of luck, says Miguel Quiroga. I think they'll get good results. His co-pilot, Sissy Arias, talks of her pride that a Brazilian team has chosen their airline to fly to Medellin. But just a few hours later, almost everyone on board became the victim of an appalling tragedy. The plane never reached its destination. All but 6 people on board were killed. The 71 bodies have been transported from the crash site as investigators try to understand what happened here. the lack of any explosion was an indication that the plane had little or no fuel on board, and the pilot seems to have confirmed that in his final transmissions. Lamia 933 is in total electrical failure. He says no fuel. He pleads for an immediate landing, citing a fuel emergency. After taking off from Santa Cruz in Bolivia, the airline director says the pilot had the option of refuelling in Bogotá, but he chose to carry on to Medellín. He crashed just minutes from the airport.
One thing we are investigating is the engine stopped due to a lack of fuel, and without fuel, the electrical power would have been completely lost.
In the Chapecoense home stadium last night, a memorial service for the team. They were killed on their way to what would have been the biggest match of their lives. But it's here that their coffins will be brought for the funeral service. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Let's speak to our transport correspondent Richard Westcott. It seems extraordinary that a plane can just run out of fuel like that.
It does. We still don't have all the facts, but there are some obvious critical questions. I mean, you heard Richard there say it was due to refuel en route. Well, why didn't that happen? That's the first critical question. Secondly, it's clear that it's circling for about 13 minutes before it comes into land. It's only about 3 or 4 minutes from landing at the airport. So why has it been told to circle? Well, apparently another aircraft was given priority to land ahead of it because that aircraft had a problem as well. So they'll now be asking, why didn't the crew make it clearer, perhaps, that they had a crisis on their hands? Didn't they realise just how bad the situation was? Because 13 minutes of circling, well, that could be the critical amount of time that could have got them down. So there's still lots to come out. They've still got to analyse, what's known as the black boxes. They're doing that in the UK. They'll be in the UK by the weekend or next week, and they'll be going through that to really get at the facts. But critical questions really on decisions taken potentially by the crew and by air traffic controllers that could theoretically have stopped this catastrophe.
And extraordinary, even when you just look at those pictures, that anyone survived it.
Absolutely. What is interesting about those pictures, for an air crash, actually the aircraft is quite intact and the pieces are quite big. Now that possibly suggests, I've been talking to pilots, that the pilot was trying to sort of glide it in rather than it hit the ground very, very hard. So potentially, perhaps that's why just a few people survived.
Richard, thank you. The time is just after 1:15, our top story this lunchtime. The latest figures say immigration to the UK reached its highest ever level in the year running up to the EU referendum. And still to come, the equivalent of the penalty shootout that brought a dramatic end to the Chess World Championship.
In South today, an icy morning. We'll have your weather forecast. Also, after 5 months disruption for bus passengers in Dorset, drivers say their strike is over. And look who's dropped in for coffee, maybe biscuits too, the flippered guests at a Wiltshire camp.
The poor performance of some schools in the north of England and in the Midlands is fuelling the sense of a divided nation. That's according to the Chief Inspector of Schools, Sir Michael Wilshaw. In his final annual Ofsted report, he says that standards are rising, but he also said the failure to improve schools in some parts of England fed into why people voted for Brexit. Our education correspondent Gillian Hargreaves reports.
Which of the following
Wright Robinson College in Manchester is the sort of school Sir Michael Wilshaw wants to see more of in the north of England. After years of failure, it's been rated as outstanding by Ofsted. But in his annual report, the Chief Inspector of Schools said too many others in the region are falling behind. The gap between the performance of secondary schools in the North and Midlands compared to the South and East of England has widened in the past year.
The people of Manchester and Liverpool and the north of England are not being treated fairly, that their children have less of a chance of educational success than people south of the Wash. And that's feeding into a wider malaise that I sense with the Brexit vote.
The quality of education for 16 to 19-year-olds studying vocational courses has also come in for criticism. Sir Michael says there's a need for greater emphasis on the importance of technical knowledge and skills. The catering course at this college is rated as outstanding, but Sir Michael Wilshaw says too many further education colleges are not providing a good education. And he says there's a concern that the workforce of tomorrow won't have the sorts of skills they need to compete in the global economy. The Chief Inspector says the education system is at a crossroads. We can intervene to inject the system with the vision, skills and energy it needs, or we can be content with the status quo and the consequences of that failure.
We'll take students in with a particular set of interests, we'll try and broaden their experience and link the advice that we give them into careers that are there in the local economy in which they're going to live.
The government is reviewing the quality of further education across England and says the proportion of schools rated good or outstanding is the highest ever recorded and is rising in every region. Gillian Hargreaves, BBC News.
The telecoms regulator Ofcom has launched a review of landline-only rental prices after concerns that people may not be getting value for money. It said landline prices have risen by up to 41% in real terms since 2010, while wholesale prices have fallen by a quarter. Well, with me now is our personal finance correspondent, Simon Gompertz. It is expensive, isn't it? How much is it costing nowadays?
Well, typically we're paying between £17 and £19 a month for the old-style connection, the plug in the wall that you plug the old-style telephone into, and then you'd pay for broadband on top of that. And as you say, that's gone up by as much as 41% over the last 6 years, while the actual cost of the line to the provider has gone down by 25%. A couple of examples there. Sky up £5 over the last 6 years, Virgin Media a £5 increase, and the people particularly affected by this are around 1 million or so who have the landline connection but don't have the broadband internet connection and don't have a mobile to rely on. So for them the landline is very much a lifeline, and it's a preponderance of older people within that group.
So Ofcom have launched a review of this. What could happen?
Well, they're going to investigate. They say they'll come up with measures to protect those who are affected next year if they decide that's necessary. But interestingly, Virgin Media has already said in reaction to this announcement that whereas its landline customers are going to have to pay £19, up from £17.99, those who are over 65 and disabled customers will stick with the £17.99, and that's now going to be frozen. So there's some evidence there that the regulator Ofcom, throwing its weight around, is having an effect.
Simon, thank you. More than 250,000 people are homeless in England, according to the housing charity Shelter. The problem is most acute in central London, but the study says it goes far beyond the capital to areas such as the West Midlands and Brighton. More organs are being donated and more lives are being saved, according to the Welsh Government, a year after Wales became the only country in the UK to introduce a new organ donation law. It means people who live here are considered to be willing to donate their organs after death unless they've made clear that they don't want to. Nearly 500,000 people have now fled the fighting in the Syrian city of Aleppo. The UN has criticised Russia for not allowing aid into areas of the city where people are desperate for food and medical supplies. Our correspondent Richard Galpin reports.
Pro-government forces are pushing deeper and deeper into rebel-held territory in Aleppo. Their offensive has momentum, and they've now been attacking the southern part of the key rebel enclave. But opposition fighters have been hitting back, desperately trying to hold on to what remains of their stronghold in the city, which has been in their hands for years. The rebel-held area marked in grey on this map has already shrunk dramatically in recent days, with much of the northern part now in government hands. And as the offensive continues, there's speculation the rebels could be pushed out of the city altogether within weeks. The collapse of the rebel front lines under intense bombardment has led to around 30,000 civilians fleeing, many crossing into government-held areas where they can get food and medicine. But the fate of the men arriving here is unknown. For those still living inside the rebel enclave, life is increasingly desperate. Hundreds of casualties, no medicine, not even anaesthetics for surgery, and very little food. Today, the United Nations said the total number of people in need of help in Aleppo was overwhelming.
400,000 in the internally displaced in western Aleppo are now joined by tens of thousands or more. We need a winter program for them. Europe panicked because we got 400,000 from Syria, all of Europe. West Aleppo has that alone.
One possible answer to this crisis, now being discussed, is to create humanitarian corridors to allow the sick and injured to leave eastern Aleppo and to send in supplies of food and medicine to the area. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Voters are going to the polls to elect a new MP for the constituency of Richmond Park. A by-election was triggered in the southwest London seat after the former Conservative MP Zac Goldsmith resigned in protest over the expansion of Heathrow Airport. He's seeking re-election as an independent candidate. The Conservatives had a majority of just over 23,000 at the 2015 general election, with the Lib Dems in second place. There is a full list of candidates on the BBC News website. In his first press conference as England manager, Gareth Southgate said the side must not take qualification for granted. The new manager said he needed to keep his eye on the ball. Our sports correspondent David Ornstein is at Wembley for us now. David.
Yes, Gareth Southgate spoke impeccably well, really. He talked of the great honour to lead a team that he feels has huge potential. He signed a 4-year contract, and contrary to reports, that contract does not contain a break clause, so he will lead England, hopefully, to the 2018 World Cup and the 2020 European Championships. His audition came in a 4-match spell as interim boss. He won 2, lost 2, impressed some with his style of play. With the players, of course, many of whom he worked with as under-21 coach. Now, he becomes England's 5th manager in 10 years, their 3rd in 2016 alone. He was the only man interviewed for the job, the only candidate, the only option, and he'll hope to succeed where so many others have failed.
So I've had a great insight over the last few weeks into what the job entails, every aspect of it. I don't think any job is impossible. I think I said a few weeks ago that some jobs are more difficult than others, some are more complex. This is certainly one of those. Has great interest for everybody, and that comes with great responsibility, but I'm ready to embrace that. You know, I feel I've had that throughout my career in different roles I've been in, and now is a great moment to step forward and help lead our country through what I think can be a really exciting period.
We won't see Southgate's team in action until the 22nd of March, when they play a friendly against Germany in Dortmund. And then four days later, they face Lithuania in a World Cup qualifier here at Wembley. Southgate is probably best known for an infamous moment, missing the decisive penalty in the Euro 96 semi-final against Germany. And since then, England fans have become so accustomed to major tournament disappointment. Southgate will hope to put that right. It's his job to do so. And one other note, he confirmed that Wayne Rooney will remain as England captain.
David, thank you. Now, expressions like lightning fast and quick fire may not normally be ones you associate with chess, but after 3 weeks of grueling play, that was how this year's World Chess Championship ended. The players from Norway and Russia were tied 6-all, so it all came down to the equivalent of a chess penalty shootout, as Helena Lee reports.
2 grandmasters of chess, one board, fighting for the title of World Chess Champion. And they're off. After 3 weeks of play, the final 4 quickfire games to determine the winner. For chess fans, these fast ones are a thrill, moves made at lightning speed. Complete concentration too, helped by the soundproof room. This tense final was watched by millions across the world. And here's the move where Magnus Carlsen puts his opponent in checkmate. After the match, the champion said it hadn't been an easy game.
I would like to thank my opponent again for a very good fight. Again, it wasn't easy at any moment, and yeah, if a couple of crucial moments had gone another way, we'd have a different champion.
For Magnus Carlsen, a double celebration. World chess champion for the 4th time. But he's also celebrating something else. The day he won was his birthday. He's still only 26. Helena Lee, BBC News.
Now, according to folklore, the best place to find a pot of gold is at the end of a rainbow. But police in New York are looking for a man who found one in the back of a van. And it was a very big pot of gold flakes to be precise, worth £1.2 million. The thief was caught on camera stealing the metal bucket from the back of the security van on a busy road in Manhattan. They say he probably didn't know what the bucket contained, but his getaway wasn't quite so simple. The haul was so heavy, about 6 stone, that the man is seen at one point putting the bucket down on the curb so he can catch his breath. He's believed to be hiding out now in Florida. Time for a look at the weather with Ben Rich. Not many rainbows around here at the moment, are there?
No, you need some rain for that, Sophie, and there's precious little of that in the forecast. We may have changed the month, but the weather is not changing drastically at all. It stays largely dry through the start of December. There'll still be some patchy frost and some fog patches too over the next few days. I think this could be the big weather maker, variable amounts of cloud. That will make a big difference to how things look and feel. At the moment, high pressure firmly in charge. That's why it's settled. But with the high drifting slightly to the southwest, it allows northwesterly winds to try to bring more in the way of cloud, some slightly less cold air. Now, fast forward to the weekend, it's not much of a change, but we push the high pressure up to the northeast. That opens the door to much drier air from the continent, much colder air too, but with more in the way of sunshine. But that is having a big difference, or at least a big effect on how things feel overnight, where we had the sunny skies overnight, or the clear skies, I should say. We started sunny and cold this morning, but across the northwest highlands of Scotland, there was more cloud, and we started the day in double figures, and still quite a lot of cloud across the northwest of Scotland through the rest of this afternoon, even a little bit of rain across the Northern Isles. Quite a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland as well, some fog patches still lingering here, and some extra cloud drifting into northern England, East Anglia, down into the southeast. Now, there'll be some patches of cloud across Wales and the southwest, still some lingering fog patches too, but here the best of the brightness after a cold, frosty start here, though. Temperatures really struggling to recover, and as it gets dark, as night falls, the temperatures are going to fall once again. Quite a hard frost across parts of the southwest, Wales, Northern Ireland, some fog patches as well. Now, generally, further north and east, there'll be more in the way of cloud, but nowhere is it going to stay reliably cloudy all night long. So if you do see any clear, starry skies, just about anywhere, you could get a touch of frost to take us into tomorrow morning. High pressure still with us tomorrow. That means a lot of fine and dry weather. Some changes. Northern Ireland should have more brightness than today. Across the southwest, perhaps more cloud than today, and a weak weather front bringing a little bit of rain into eastern coastal areas. Temperatures around 6 to 9 degrees. Now, remember, as we get on into the weekends, we'll be pushing our area of high pressure up to the northeast. We start to bring in this easterly wind, the drier air from the continent. So we're likely to see things brightening up with some sunshine in the south on Saturday. And then on Sunday, as more of us get into that easterly flow, well, we'll see that sunshine spreading further north. Quite blustery across the southwest, temperatures of 3 to 8 degrees. But remember, where you have those clear skies overnight, that's where you're going to get some frost and fog. Why are things so quiet at the moment? Log on to the BBC Weather website. My colleague John Hammond has recorded a video that will answer all of your questions. Back to you, Sophie.
Ben, thank you. A reminder of our main story this lunchtime. Immigration to the UK reached its highest ever level in the year running up to the EU referendum, according to the latest official figures. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.